In a significant diplomatic development that marks a potential turning point in international trade relations, China and Canada have reached a breakthrough agreement on tariffs, following a high-stakes meeting in Beijing. The announcement came after discussions between Chinese President Xi Jinping and Canadian Prime Minister Carney, representing the first visit by a Canadian leader to China in nearly a decade. This meeting has produced tangible results that could reshape the economic relationship between these two major trading nations. The core of the agreement centers on substantial tariff reductions that address long-standing economic tensions. China has committed to dramatically lowering its levies on Canadian canola oil, reducing them from an punishing 85% down to just 15%. This reduction is scheduled to take effect by the 1st of March, providing immediate relief to Canadian agricultural producers who have been struggling under the weight of these restrictive trade barriers. In exchange, Canada has agreed to adjust its approach to Chinese electric vehicles, committing to tax them at the most-favoured-nation rate of 6.1%, a significant shift from previous policy. Prime Minister Carney addressed reporters following the discussions, providing details of what many observers are calling a landmark deal. The agreement represents far more than just numbers on a customs form. It signals a fundamental reset in the relationship between Ottawa and Beijing after years of diplomatic friction and retaliatory trade measures that have damaged economic ties and created uncertainty for businesses on both sides of the Pacific. President Xi Jinping characterized the development as a turnaround in bilateral relations, using language that suggested both satisfaction with the current progress and optimism about future cooperation. For Carney, the agreement represents a significant political victory. The Canadian Prime Minister has been actively pursuing a strategy to diversify his country's trade relationships, reducing dependence on the United States, which remains Canada's largest trading partner by a substantial margin. This diversification effort has taken on increased urgency in light of the unpredictable tariff policies emanating from Washington under the Trump administration. The backdrop to this agreement includes a turbulent period in North American trade relations. The United States has implemented what Carney and others have described as on-again, off-again tariffs, creating an atmosphere of economic uncertainty that has prompted Canadian policymakers to seek more stable and predictable trading relationships elsewhere. In this context, the agreement with China takes on added significance, representing not just an economic arrangement, but a strategic reorientation of Canadian trade policy. One particularly notable aspect of the deal involves the potential for increased Chinese investment in Canada. This development carries geopolitical implications that extend beyond the immediate economic benefits. Canada shares the world's longest land border with the United States, and the prospect of significant Chinese capital flowing into projects and industries on America's doorstep will undoubtedly be watched closely in Washington. The move could be interpreted as a signal that traditional American allies are willing to forge deeper economic ties with China when faced with trade policy uncertainty from the United States. Prime Minister Carney appeared to acknowledge this dynamic in his comments to the press, though he chose his words carefully. He noted that Canada's relationship with China had become more predictable in recent months, contrasting this stability with the volatility that has characterized relations with Washington. Carney described his discussions with Beijing officials as realistic and respectful, suggesting a working relationship built on mutual understanding of each nation's interests and constraints. However, the Canadian leader was also careful to emphasize that this economic rapprochement does not represent a wholesale alignment with Chinese positions on all matters. Carney stated explicitly that Ottawa does not agree with Beijing on everything, and he took pains to outline what he described as Canada's red lines. These non-negotiable positions include concerns about human rights practices in China, allegations of Chinese interference in Canadian elections, and the need for what he termed guardrails in the bilateral relationship to prevent misunderstandings or overreach. When questioned specifically about China's human rights record, a topic that has been a source of tension in relations with Western nations, Carney offered a pragmatic response. He stated that Canada takes the world as it is, not as it wishes it to be, suggesting a foreign policy approach grounded in realism rather than idealism. This framing allows Ottawa to pursue economic cooperation with Beijing while maintaining its stated positions on values and principles. International relations experts and diplomatic observers believe that Carney's visit to Beijing could serve as a template for other nations grappling with similar pressures. Countries around the world are experiencing economic pain as a result of Washington's tariff policies, and many are reassessing their trade strategies in response. The Canadian example demonstrates that it is possible to pivot toward closer economic ties with China while attempting to maintain boundaries on political and security issues. President Xi Jinping has been working to position China as a stable and reliable partner in global affairs, particularly as an alternative to what Beijing portrays as the increasingly erratic policies of the United States. The Chinese leadership has been promoting what it describes as more pragmatic international relationships, using the phrase win-win cooperation to describe its preferred model of engagement. This approach emphasizes mutual economic benefit rather than the zero-sum competition that has characterized some aspects of contemporary great power relations. The strategy appears to be yielding results. In recent weeks, Beijing has welcomed a succession of leaders from major economies and American allies. The South Korean president made an official visit to China, as did the Irish Prime Minister. Reports indicate that the British Prime Minister is expected to travel to Beijing in the near future, as is the German Chancellor. This parade of Western leaders to the Chinese capital suggests that Xi's diplomatic offensive is finding a receptive audience among nations seeking alternatives to an American-dominated trading system that many view as increasingly unpredictable. During his remarks, Prime Minister Carney emphasized the magnitude of recent global changes and their implications for Canadian policy. He stated that the world has changed dramatically and that how Canada positions itself in this new landscape will shape the country's future for decades to come. This framing suggests that Canadian policymakers view the current moment as a critical juncture, requiring bold decisions rather than incremental adjustments to existing strategies. Earlier in his 3-day visit to China, Carney had used even more striking language to describe the bilateral relationship. He suggested that the partnership between Canada and China could position both nations for success in what he termed a new world order. He went on to criticize the state of the multilateral system, saying it had been eroded, or to use a more direct term, undercut. While Carney did not explicitly blame the United States for this erosion, the implication was clear to many observers, who see American unilateralism as a major factor in the weakening of international institutions and norms. The formal discussions took place in the Great Hall of the People, the imposing government building in Beijing that serves as the venue for important state occasions. As the Chinese and Canadian delegations sat down for talks, President Xi offered his perspective on the significance of the meeting. He stated that the healthy and stable development of China-Canada relations is conducive to world peace, stability, development, and prosperity, framing the bilateral relationship in global terms that emphasized both nations' roles as significant international actors. Tariffs have been the central point of contention in China-Canada relations for several years. The current dispute can be traced to decisions made in 2024, when Canada imposed 100% tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. This move followed similar actions by the United States and reflected concerns in North America about the competitive threat posed by China's rapidly advancing electric vehicle industry, which benefits from substantial government support and can produce vehicles at price points that Western manufacturers struggle to match. Beijing responded to the Canadian tariffs with countermeasures targeting Canadian agricultural and food exports. China imposed levies on more than $2 billion worth of Canadian products, with canola seed and canola oil among the most significantly affected commodities. The impact was substantial and immediate. Chinese imports of Canadian goods fell by 10% in 2025 as the trade war escalated and economic ties contracted. The agreement reached during Carney's visit addresses these issues directly, but includes important limitations and conditions. Under the terms of the deal, Canada will permit the entry of 49,000 Chinese electric vehicles into the Canadian market at the favourable 6.1% tariff rate. The inclusion of this cap reflects the concerns of Canadian automobile manufacturers, who fear that without such limits, the domestic market could be flooded with affordable Chinese electric vehicles.